Well, hello, it is Thursday. Welcome back. We are going through our Romans chapter 1 here and just seeing what Paul was writing again, trying to find out for each of us. The question is, what are we longing for God to use us for? What are we longing to see God do through us? This week, we stay in chapter 1 of Romans. Paul writes this epistle to the church in Rome while on his third trip to Corinth. He stayed in Corinth for about 3 months on this trip, and it was written in about 56 AD. The passage is Romans chapter 1, 18 to 23. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For God's eternal power and character cannot be seen, but from the beginning of creation, God has shown what these are like by all he has made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. They don't worship the glorious and eternal God. Instead, they worship idols that are made to look like humans who cannot live forever, and like birds, animals, and reptiles. Again, this is from Romans chapter 1, reading 18 to 23. We're going through the whole week in Romans chapter 1. And this is Paul writing to the church in Rome while he was in Corinth. Through the reading, I'm going to go through some of the verses 18 this morning. You realize the importance of yesterday's passage about sharing the gospel. When we come to faith in Christ, we are no longer unrighteous. We are no longer unrighteous. Through Christ, we are made righteous in God. The importance and the results of being made righteous come from looking at verse 18. Where we see that it says that those who are unrighteousness and ungodly will face the wrath of God. This is what is at stake. Our lives, right? Our lives, our eternal destination, and our families' lives and eternal destination. Everything's at stake. And that's why verses 16 and 17 is so important. This is what we get here, that everything is at stake. And that's what Paul is writing to the church in Rome about. The anger of God is not something that should be played around with. We need to come to this passage and realize that God will triumph over anything that is against him. In verses 19 and 20, again, Romans chapter 1, 19 and 20, these two verses talk about the attributes and how people can see God. These are things that we need to refer to when people ask, how do we know that there is a God? God has revealed himself to us in Christ. So the question for humanity is, have you put your faith in Christ? It's not a question of whether there is a God. It's, have you put your faith in God? We shouldn't, I'm not around too many people in my life that ask whether there is a God. Most are at a place where they understand that there is a God and that there is a bigger happening than them. And so we need to go forward with that the question isn't, is there a God? It really becomes, have you put your faith in God? And everything is on the line. If we look at verses 21 and 23, it explains how people have seen God and seen his attributes in others, but they still reject him. So they've seen that there is a God. They've seen the attributes in others, and yet they still continue to live their life for this world. Look at what it says happens in their hearts. It means that their hearts become darkened, cloudy, confused, unhealthy, and they become fools, it says, right? Lastly, if we read in verse 23 about how people have turned away from what is of God to what is made up of humanity, right? They have missed God because they have focused on things that pass away and will not last. They are distracted by the things of this world. Listen, the longer that you are growing up living in this world, the longer that you're living in this world without knowledge of who God is and what he belongs, how he belongs to you and what he wants for you, the longer that you live without him, you're living and learning of the way of the world. And that becomes so much harder to get it turned around. And that's why it's so important to teach those when they're young about God and what the big picture is really all about. Because the longer we start to run after this race in this world, running after the things of this world, then the longer and harder it is to get turned around. God's always right there waiting. It's one step turning and saying, I want to start living for you. But it's so hard to change all of our habits, right? We are so distracted by the things of this world and the goals of this world and what we need to do and what tomorrow brings and what we need to prepare for. And we miss out on really what God has asked of us. The time has come for us to leave our selfishness and pride and lean on God for our strength to share the gospel. It has burdened me greatly to see that people have turned away from the things of God and have flock to the things of this world, and they think they'll have time later to come back to God. They're hoping that they'll have time later. Some have tasted and have been to church and they've learned about God, but I'm not so sure that they're all following God, right? And so that's where it burdens me that so many have turned away from God because they're so distracted of the goals and winning in this world rather than winning for Christ. They have seen the way of the world and are now running after those things. So I end it by asking us to be proactive in sharing the gospel with friends and family members, but also with those people that we encounter on an everyday basis. We should, as we learned yesterday, always be willing to share our testimony, always be willing to share and not be afraid or ashamed of the gospel. Wherever the Lord takes us today, we should be ready. Who are the 3 people possibly that God is laying on your heart today? Ask them how you can pray for them. Also, a simple thing that I keep saying during this time, go on social media apps, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat for that matter, and just simply post, how can I be praying for you today? And maybe put a picture or put it in a colorful background and simply ask, how can I be praying for you today? And if you can dialogue in the DMs and actually pray for them would be great. Or you can put, please send prayer requests to me through DM. So as you pray, take a moment to pray for those because of their struggles. They turn away and become hardened hearts toward the gospel. We know who they are. They're not, listen, the battle isn't between flesh and blood. That's what the scriptures tell us, that they're not the enemy. Even though they're talking down about God, they're just lost, confused, hurting, or sick. And we need to be able to come to them and love on them and to be able to share the gospel in whatever way we can. So as I ended, I just ask that you would pray that they desire to know the truth, whoever it is that God is laying on your heart. Pray that they desire to know the truth. Love them through this time, and in time, have a time to be able to maybe walk with them and study the Word with them. All right, so there's so many that have been distracted and are trying to win by the way that they've been taught. And we know that there's a better way. We know there's the only way, and that's through Christ. So I ask you to think about who those people might be in your life that need to hear the gospel, and be bold in just loving on them, and ask God what that looks like. May God add His blessings to the reading of His Word. Have a great day.